I'm Mike Simpson, I'm the studio director at the Creative Assembly. I think the Total War games are unique, and the thing that makes them unique is it's in the name, Total War. It's not just a game of battles, or it's a game that simulates the economics, the politics, as well as the huge battles that were fought. So you actually run an entire nation. You build up your armies, you build up your technical development, you manage your population, build armies, go to war, and try and dominate. The formula for Total War, the basic arrangement of the game, really came about by accident. When I joined Creative Assembly, it was doing sports conversions, things like Australian rules football and rugby for EA, and we wanted to break out into a new genre. And at that point in time, there'd been quite a lot of Command and Conquer clones come out, which were very successful. They actually sold quite a lot, and we looked at some of those games and thought, whoa, that's easy, we can do that. So we started off with the idea of producing basically a fairly standard RTS game, top-down, usual sort of thing. And we looked to set it in the Japanese period for a whole load of reasons. But as we went along, we started off with the standard top-down view, but using thousands of men rather than hundreds, tiny little ants running around, and we did a whole lot of work on flocking and things like that, and it looked pretty cool. But at some point along the way, we had the idea of moving the camera down and sticking it in the eyes of the general. So you're actually looking out across the battlefield in 3D. It wasn't possible before then, because 3D hardware had only just come out. So it was about the time the first 3D effects cards were becoming available. And initially we thought, no, that's impossible. You can't generate a spline-based landscape. That's curves rather than just polygons. You can't do that in real time and stick thousands of men on. Just no chance. But we had a very good programmer who put it together really quickly and basically proved it could be done, much to our amazement. And that's where the concept of a 3D battlefield through the eyes of the general with thousands of men came from. But we wanted still to have a deeper strategy element to it, so we married that with all the kind of things we'd liked from some of the turn-based games, and came up with a pretty unique formula at the end of that. I think there are probably a fair number of different influences which led into the whole Total War thing. There was obviously, we started off with the idea of doing a real-time strategy game, so there are things that we liked about that. But there have been lots of games I'd worked on in the past, lots of strategy games. Some of the first 3D mass battle games, there was a game called Waterloo, which basically was the Battle of Waterloo in 3D through the eyes of the general, but very, very crude, polygonal unit. So an entire unit would just be a block. But the actual game was great. I loved the gameplay in it. It was just time to move it on graphically. I also worked on the UK release of Lords of the Rising Sun, which was a Cinemaware game. That was set in Japan. It actually also had the split between strategy and battles, and I really liked the content in that game as well. So while I'd like to say it was a totally original concept, no influences, we just cooked it up, that's not really true. It's very hard to do something that's completely original. What you end up doing is coming up with an original mix of things that have been usually done before. I'm not surprised at the success of the series, because there really isn't anything else like it, and the fundamentals of the gameplay that underlie it all are really, really sound. And if you build a game on sound fundamentals, all you have to do from that point is implement it well, and you're going to end up with a great game. At the beginning, when we started on Shogun, we were really aiming for a sort of B-grade standard RTS. So At that point, I probably would have been surprised, but as we went along, we kept seeing more and more potential. We kept saying, oh, if we do this, it'll be better. If we do this, it'll be better. So we redesigned as we went along. And by the time we got halfway through, we could see that we're actually onto something. And that there was quite a lot of potential here. And we managed to persuade our publisher that this was true and to fund it all the way to the end. I don't know if there's a typical Total War player. I think it actually appeals to a wide variety of different people. You come at it from different directions. If you're a hardcore gamer and you just like good gameplay, then there's plenty of that in there for you. But I think there are also history buffs who don't necessarily play many games at all, who like the sort of immersion in the period and the visuals and that side of it. And there'll be people coming in from playing RTS games who want something with a bit more depth, and people coming from the turn-based games who want a bit more action. It really does have something for everybody in there.
The Ashikaga Shogunate has ruled Japan from their capital in Kyoto. The recent Onin War.
Creating a historical game has both advantages and disadvantages. You have to remain true to the period. But you might think that causes problems, where areas where historical reality would conflict with gameplay. But in fact, it's not the case, because history or real politics and warfare is in fact a very well balanced game. If it wasn't balanced, something would change. Right? So you can take any situation from history, any arrangement of factions or forces or whatever, and at that particular instance, it is by definition balanced. So all you have to do to produce a balanced game is be true to the tactics and strategy that underlay all those things. And if you produce a good simulation, you're going to end up with a balanced game with real gameplay. It's had warfare's had thousands of years to sort of evolve, its gameplay effectively. So very, very rarely do we come into come up against a conflict between historical reality and gameplay. Where that did happen, we generally favour gameplay. It's generally where we had to simplify things down, because it's always a process of simplifying quite complicated systems and concepts down to something which is manageable within a game. When we're digging through all this historical material to work out what to put in the game, we come across so many things where you just couldn't make it up. Historical reality is stranger than fiction by a long way. You get things like in the Shogun period, we had ninjas hiding in toilets, waiting for their victim and doing unspeakable things when he turned up. You have there was a case where a Japanese commander was wooed by a Korean courtesan who turned out to be an assassin, and took him up to the top of the tower for a quiet moment and basically pulled him over the edge with it. So that was the inspiration behind the legendary geisha in Shogun. So we try to take things like that, historical incidents that actually happened, and sort of condense them in some way into the gameplay. And it's a lot of fun doing it as well. I think we're really proud of what we've achieved with Total War, and there have been a number of points along the way where that's been particularly strong. I mean, obviously getting awards, seeing the reviews for the first time, they're great moments. Getting good coverage, going to the trade shows and getting a good reaction, or winning strategy game of the show. There's been a lot of moments like that. But I think the best moments have actually been while we've been developing the game. When occasionally it's done something that's really surprised us. There was an occasion when I was playing Medieval where I was allied with another faction and getting on quite well. They sent a priest into one of my territories and just tipped the population over the limit and made them rebel. And I immediately followed it up with a diplomat who bribed the rebels and took the province off me. This is while I'm allied to them. And I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't without breaking the alliance, which would have had all sorts of consequences. And that was something that we'd not designed into the game. That was the game coming up with a combination of tactics which we hadn't thought of, which worked brilliantly and was incredibly sneaky. I was really quite proud of the game at that point, when it started doing things I hadn't intended, which were good. When I look back over the projects and try and figure out, is there anything we would have done differently? Overall, probably not. I mean, there were a few things along the way which caused us a huge amount of pain, where if we'd known things, we might not have gone down that path. And they might not be the things you'd expect. The really difficult things like getting all the men on screen, getting the AOL working, that just required a lot of clever people working for a lot of time. The things that cause us trouble are things like, in Shogun there was a throne room where diplomats came in and talked to you and so on. And it was composed out of different video clips, basically different renders of the scene with different people in it coming in and out. It sounds really simple, but with all the different characters and the different speeches, it ended up being horrendously complicated. And we had an absolute nightmare, sort of keeping the lighting consistent between all the components and making them fit together exactly, so you could overlay the man on top of the doors, get the doors sliding open. It sounds trivial, but it was a nightmare. And if we'd known how bad that was going to be, we wouldn't have done that. So there are occasional things like that. It ended up looking very pretty, and the fact that we didn't do it in any of the subsequent games. I think after 2 more games and a couple of add-ons, I think we're possibly just about over the throne room incident and could contemplate doing something similar again now, but it did leave us scarred for a while. The whole process is playing the game as new features go in and seeing them work for the first time, and seeing them go beyond what you'd originally anticipated. So you'll put a feature into the game and it'll start combining with some other feature in a way which you didn't intend. Just seeing the whole thing come alive, I think, is the best part of it. When we first started the series, we were looking for a setting for the first game, and there were a number of things that it had to satisfy. First, the content had to be cool and interesting, and we looked at a number of different areas. We looked at Rome, we looked at Japan, and we basically took a quick look across the whole of history, looking for cool content. And Japan definitely satisfied that. We were really well into the whole samurai thing, and some of the historical stuff that went on was so cool and just insane. We couldn't resist that. But we also needed a period where there was some kind of technological race going on, because the game needs tech development to drive the whole tech tree and give you progression through the game. And the third thing it needed to have was a situation where you start off with a number of different factions all vying for supremacy and end up with one of them winning. And 16th century Japan was perfect for that in all respects. It had the introduction of guns and gunpowder, so there was a tech race going on at the time. And it had their whole Civil War period, where the country did fracture into a dozen or so major factions, and one of them ended up dominating. So feudal Japan was absolutely perfect, and that's what we chose to do. It was really not knowing where we were going to end up and how we were going to get there. After our sort of initial period where we toyed around with the standard RTS, once we'd gone for 3D, there were a whole load of technical challenges to solve there, and they weren't just the things that you might expect. Getting 1,000 men displayed at the time was tricky, but that was basically just an engineering problem, a fairly standard engineering problem. The more difficult part was AI and collision detection. Once you've got 1,000 guys on there, they've all got to detect when they bump into enemies and things like that. And that's actually a much more difficult problem than just putting them on the screen in the first place. And then getting them to do something sensible on top of that. There weren't really any games that were doing mass battle AI for a whole battlefield. Interestingly, we actually relied quite a lot for guidance on that, not just from our experience of tabletop wargaming and that kind of thing, but Sun Tzu's Art of War. It's a book that was written thousands of years ago, which is basically a Chinese general saying these are the rules for warfare. And the way he wrote it, it literally was rules that you could look at and say, okay, I can program that. It was things like, if you outnumber your enemy 10 to 1, surround him. If you outnumber him 5 to 1, engage him. If you outnumber him 2 to 1, and so on. And he actually had ratios and all this kind of thing. It was exactly like a rule book. And there were dozens and dozens and dozens of rules from the Art of War that we could just lift and put straight into our AI. That gave us a big kickstart. The team for Shogun started off with just me and the programmer, the lead programmer, and we gradually built it up over the first year to a team of 10, which by today's standards is still tiny. I guess the downside of having a small team like that is it did take us a long time to get the game written, and we did work under insane amounts of pressure. I mean, there was an 8-month period drawing towards the end where we were working every night till 9 or 10 and one day at weekends, and we did that for 8 months. I don't think there was ever a time in the whole process when we thought that what we were trying to do couldn't be done or was impossible. And maybe that was just naivety at the time, but it did turn out to be true. We did achieve pretty much everything we intended to. There's always features that you don't manage to squeeze in, but they're always there waiting for the next game. We just packaged all those up, made sure we didn't forget anything that was worthwhile, move that on to the design phase of the next game. So, we're always pretty gung-ho about being able to achieve what we aim, and so far we haven't actually fallen over. Long may it continue. I think the point in the Shogun development where we realised we'd got something special on our hands was when we made the transition from doing a top-down 2D RTS to making it 3D, and we'd actually managed to get a realistic-looking landscape on screen with 1,000 or so men all moving around on there. At that point, immediately it was just completely different to anything that had gone before, and we thought, yes, this is something new, something special. We took it to one of the trade shows in that state. Really just a fairly crude demo, but everybody was completely wowed by it. And at that point, the first review of Shogun was actually written by us right back at the start of the project. It's one of the tools that we used to help sell the game to our publisher. Explain what the game is. What we did is we actually wrote an edge review, which had screenshots, which we'd mocked up. It went through the whole game, the gameplay, and basically it was all done in exactly the kind of language that the edge used, to the point where you couldn't tell it wasn't a real review. And it got 9, so that convinced the publisher. Now, by the time we got to the end of the process, we'd finished the game. It's actually quite remarkable how similar the reviews that did come out were to the original one that we'd written. And we knew the game by then was pretty good, and we were pretty much expecting to get great reviews for it. There's always a bit of uncertainty because occasionally you'll get a review where it's just not his cup of tea, but you try and make sure that doesn't happen. And the magazine's very good about making sure that the right people get the game to review. So we were pretty comfortable, and we got good reviews. When we finished Shogun, we wanted to look for another period to do. So we were looking basically for the same things we were with Shogun. We wanted cool content. We wanted a period where there was technological change to drive the whole tech tree, and we wanted a period or a location where there were lots of different factions vying for supremacy. Again, we cast our eye across the whole of history, and the medieval period in Europe stood out as being the one that appealed to us the most. When we'd done Shogun, we were amazed at some of the completely insane things that the Japanese got up to during their Civil War period. But when we looked into Europe, it was even madder. There was even more stuff, completely ridiculous things that people believed and did. And the whole warfare of the period was so constant, intense, varied. It was just a great period to choose. I think the main area where Medieval took the Total War series further on was on the campaign game. With Shogun, the campaign game was fairly simplistic. There weren't very many unit types. There wasn't a very deep tech tree. Not very many regions. It was used to tie the battles together and give you a reason for wanting to fight battles and win. But it wouldn't have stood up as a game in its own right, against the likes of Civ or whatever. Now with Medieval, we took the whole of the campaign game and really developed it into a good, solid game in its own right. So we gave it enough depth and enough gameplay so that you could play that game, auto-resolving all the battles, never fighting the battles, and it would still be a really good game. I think we achieved that. The campaign side of the game really does stand up, and it's a great game in its own right. Has a huge amount of depth to it as well. One of the things we like to do is bury features. You bury features, just small things. They can be really tiny things, and you bury them so that players don't find them at the start, don't find them in the middle, maybe. And there's always more. There's always more to be found, and that gives the game really long-lasting appeal. I think at the end of Shogun, we were really excited about all the things that we wanted to get into the game, which we couldn't get into Shogun because we had to actually finish at some point. We couldn't just write the same game forever. We had to stop that one, and then look again at all the things that we wanted to do and had realised that we couldn't do, and put them into a new game. So I don't think we felt under any kind of pressure to do better. I think there was such a large body of stuff that we knew would make the game better. We were sure that we could take a big step forward with the next one. So we went into it fairly confident.
But a few forge their destiny. Medieval Total War.
By the time we'd finished Medieval, we'd come up with another set of features that we wanted to put in the next game, and we started looking around for a good setting for it. So again, it meant scouring through across the world through all the historical periods, looking for cool content, technological development, and lots of factions all vying for supremacy. And Rome came up as being probably the best choice for us. I mean, there were a lot of movies in the making of sword and sandal epics that were just starting production. We thought there was going to be a bit of a Rome frenzy going on with films like Gladiator and so on. It just made a lot of sense to set the thing in Rome. It had everything we needed, and it was something we were interested in doing. Rome was a revolutionary step rather than an evolutionary one from Medieval. We basically started Rome at the same time. We started the technology for Rome at the same time that we started Medieval, so we'd had time to work on a huge step forward. The main area that we were doing that was with the battlefield graphics. With Medieval and Shogun, all the little men on the battlefield were basically 2D, little tiny sprites, which meant that if you got too close to them, they went blurry and pixelated. There was a limit to how close you could get into the action. There was a limit to how much animation it was worth putting into it, and that sort of limited how realistic the battlefields were and how much immersion you felt when you were on the battlefield. With Rome, the aim was to make the men 3D. So each man had his own animations, was fully 3D. You could get as close as you liked, and they'd still look good. And that was a huge step forward, and it was a great piece of technology to develop. Now, in the early days with Shogun, we had a team size of 10. By the end of Medieval, we were probably up to 15 to 20. Rome had a team of 20 pretty much all the way through, and that's by today's standards, again, that's still quite small, but for us at the time, that was a big team. But it was necessary. There's a lot more work to do. Now, once we got the basic technology working for Rome, we started generating screenshots and so on, and they looked so astounding compared with anything that had gone before. It was very hard to sort of contain ourselves and not sort of go straight round to the nearest mag and say, look what we're doing, it's cool. In fact, we actually failed to contain ourselves completely and ended up going to E3 with a demo of the battle, probably a year earlier than we would normally do. Normally, E3 is the big trade show. It's once a year in America. Normally, with a game, you'll go to the E3 in the year that you're going to release. We went actually the year before. We just couldn't wait, and we went there. Our publisher at the time thought, no, that's too early. There's no point in showing it off that early, and they wouldn't actually give us any space on their stand to show the game off. But we were so determined, we actually hired our own little stand down in one of the other halls with all the tiny little companies, and dragged all the judges for the E3 awards round to our stand and showed them this thing. And we ended up winning Strategy Game of the Show, which was a huge surprise for Activision, our publisher, who didn't think it was anywhere near ready for that. But we knew what we got, and it really was pretty astounding already, even just the basic battle technology. Now we had the battle engine for Rome running fairly early, and quite a lot of people got to see that because we were basically shouting about it. And amongst those were some TV people, and we ended up starting to get a number of approaches from TV companies saying, we're doing, I don't know, a historical documentary or whatever, and rather than those three blokes with a tin hat that we usually hire, can we have thousands of your men on screen, please? And we followed those up, and it actually led to two TV shows being produced. One, Decisive Battles, was basically a documentary following particular battles where we'd use the engine to recreate the battle, and they'd use that to drive their show. And the other was Time Commanders, which was a game show where a team of basically ordinary people off the street was given command of a Roman army in a famous battle and fought it out, with various historians sort of generally laughing at their attempts as they went along. Both those series were very successful, and they're also a pretty good showcase for the game, even though it was fairly early in development at the time. By the time we finished, the graphics actually looked way better than they did in the TV series, and it's something that we're continuing to do. So yes, our battle engine is great for doing TV stuff, and no doubt more stuff will come out. Now we're on to doing Medieval 2, which is using basically the technology we developed from Rome to redo and extend the kind of content we had in original Medieval. It's a huge way ahead of where we were at originally with Shogun, pretty much across the board. The graphics are taking another big leap forward, and they're going to look way better than Rome did. Much more realistic, much more dark, moody, medieval. A lot more detail, which should make the battlefields feel more realistic. But all the other fronts as well. The AI for the battles has now been in continuous development for 7 years or so. We've got guys who probably know more about that kind of thing than anyone else in the world. We just keep building on what we've done before to make it give you a more realistic and more challenging opponent. So that's always going forward. And the same is true of the campaign gameplay. We keep refining that as well. So really across the board, the whole game's moved forward. It's almost unrecognisable when you compare it with the original Shogun. we actually chose to go back to the medieval period after Rome. Really, there was a lot of unfinished business we felt after medieval. We wanted to, there were things we wanted to get into medieval originally that we couldn't do. We couldn't really do justice to the whole sort of knights in armour and massive charges and all that kind of thing. Visually, we've got an opportunity to do it right. And there were gameplay things as well which we wanted to put in. So it kind of made sense to go back to that and basically finish off what we'd started with medieval and try and make the perfect game. There's no doubt that Medieval 2 is going to be the best Total War ever. It's an evolutionary development on top of Rome. The graphics take a big leap forward. We push forward across the board everywhere else as well. It's basically the Rome engine made absolutely perfect. So all of the tiny little flaws and things that you probably don't even find out about till a year after your original game's been released. We get to tidy all those up and just make it absolutely perfect. I think actually fighting a battle in Medieval 2 is going to be quite different in feel to Rome. With Rome, you were definitely marching units of men who were basically identical. It was an army of clones. And the lighting wasn't that great. The animation, basically when two guys came together to fight, they'd go through their combat animation standing near to each other, and one of them would die. Right? They weren't really engaging with each other in any true sense. Now with Medieval 2, we're putting proper combat choreography on, and making the men individuals, and that actually has had a much bigger effect than I thought it would. It's a lot of small things adding up together. It's things like men have different heads, so it's not an army of clones with all the same face. They have different shields and different helmets and so on. So there's variation within a unit which makes the men look like individuals. But more importantly than that, they actually behave like individuals as well. Just looking around, men turning their heads to look at things that are going on around them makes a huge difference. You wouldn't think it does, but it actually does. So in a fight, one of the men on the medieval battlefield will look around him, spot a target that he wants to engage, move up on that target. The other guy will turn and see him coming, turn to face him. They'll actually then engage in a fight, a proper choreographed fight of blow and counter blow, where you get blocks and parries and this kind of thing. And there are finishing moves as well. So he'll knock the guy to his knees and then finish him off. It's just way more realistic. That actually adds a huge amount to the immersion and general sense that you're actually on the battlefield. Another area in Medieval 2 where we're hoping to make a huge leap forward is with multiplayer. Multiplayer, it's always been there in the Total War series, but it's been basically a minority thing that a few players really enjoy a lot, but the vast majority of people don't really get into. There have been a number of reasons for that. I mean, technically it's actually extremely difficult to do multiplayer. You've got thousands of men, they have to all act exactly the same on all the machines in the network, and you can't transmit the position of every man on the battlefield. So what you end up having to do is run the machines all synchronized. So exactly the same things happen on all of the machines on the network. And the slightest change, it's like the butterfly effect, the slightest change on one of the machines will cause a divergence. So we've spent years dealing with that. And I've got to the point now where we've got that down to fine art. But I think the main barriers to people getting into the multiplayer were really just the way it was all packaged up. It would typically take you just as long to find a group of people, get into a game and get started as it would to actually play the battle. You'd spend half your time sitting around in the lobbies, and life's too short for that really. We needed to come up with a system which was a lot slicker, where you'd spend a few minutes in the lobby getting yourself organised, and that would then be playing, basically fighting for however long we wanted to play. So I guess that's the biggest change with Medieval 2 is basically the way the multiplayer is packaged up. Instead of fighting individual battles where you have to arrange a group of people, choose your battlefield, choose your armies and fight the battle, and then you have to go around, once you're done, maybe 10 minutes later, you have to go through the whole process again. So there's a full range there. You'll be able to drop into a game, fight for half an hour, fight for an hour, however long you want, and not spend all your time messing around in the lobby. That's probably the biggest difference. I think once we've done that, that really will open up multiplayer. It'll make it much more appealing to everybody, and we'll get vastly more people in there. I think the biggest challenge we face when it comes to growing the Total War series is really just down to resources. It's having enough really good people to be able to do all the things we want to do with it. There's no limit really to the number of different historical periods and settings that we can cover. So we could produce. I think we could keep producing these games forever, so long as we keep managing to put something new and interesting in. If you keep making the same game with different content over and over again, people get bored eventually. And in the past, that's killed other series of games have just died a death because they just churned out the same game over and over again. We don't do that. We make sure that every game, even our add-ons, have a good solid gameplay feature that's over and above what was in the original game. And our full games, we make as different as we can, probably in two stages. We have evolutionary steps, and then we have revolutionary steps. The revolutionary steps basically throw away the whole thing, start again. We pick out bits which are good, things like the AI carries on, but there's no rule that we have in place that says that the campaign map on the next game will be identical to the way it worked on the previous one. We're quite free to change and move on. But all that kind of work takes people. Basically it's resources which are our biggest limit. We've got so many things we want to do, we have to end up picking and choosing between them. The success of the series ends up setting fairly high expectations amongst the public for what comes next. So we are always under pressure not to disappoint, and I think that's actually a good thing. It makes working on the games much more interesting because, again, we're not just churning out the same thing over and over again. We are always trying to push it forward. But at the end of the day, we're actually making games that we want to play, and that's one of our basic principles. Really, is we make the games that we want to play, and then hope everybody else likes them too. So far, that's worked, and it makes the whole process fun. But yes, we're always aware that our very vociferous fan base, they're always pushing us to do loads and loads of stuff. Some of which we really want to do. Other bits we think probably not actually what they want, even though they think they want it. But there's always pressure. Now, the concept for Total War has been around for a fair few years yet so far, but not very many developers have really tried to emulate it. There've been one or two. The reason for that's quite simple. They'll take a look at the problem and run away screaming. I mean, it really is a huge hill for them to climb, and it's not just getting the men on screen. Getting the men on screen on the battlefield is relatively easy, and any good developer can do that without any problems. It's all the stuff that goes behind the scenes, collision detection, the AI in particular, and then putting it all together, basically two games at once, both the campaign game and the battle game. They both stand up as games in their own right. So it's double the size of any other problem. So most developers will look at it and think, well, for the amount of effort it's going to take us to catch up, we could probably produce 2 or 3 other games, and it's not worth their while. For the future, I hope that the Total War series is going to go on effectively forever. Technology keeps improving, so there's always a constant drive towards more realism, and I can't see any point at which that's going to end. There's plenty of historical periods to cover. There are other platforms that we might want to look at, all the way from handheld to console. There are there's getting out of historical reality and branching off into fantasy or science fiction. There's so many possibilities. We're not going to run out of things to do. So I can see us producing games like this forever, basically. I'm quite happy with it.